The rain poured heavily outside, drumming against the cracked windows of the small, dimly lit restaurant. Inside, the owner sat alone at a corner table, his head buried in his hands. The once bustling eatery was now eerily silent, save for the occasional creak of an old chair or the hum of a flickering neon sign. Stacks of unpaid bills and eviction notices lay scattered in front of him, each one a reminder of his failing business. He had poured his heart and soul into this place, but now it seemed like the end was near. Just as he was about to give up hope, a faint knock on the glass door broke the silence. Startled, he looked up and saw two figures standing outside, a man in tattered clothes and a young girl, no older than 8, clutching his hand. Their faces were pale, their clothes soaked from the rain. The man's eyes met the owner's, and in that moment, something stirred deep within him. Despite his own struggles, the owner couldn't ignore the desperation in their eyes. He hesitated for a moment, then stood up and walked to the door. As he unlocked it, the cold wind rushed in, sending a shiver down his spine. "Please," the man said, his voice trembling. "We haven't eaten in days. Can you spare some food?" The owner glanced back at his empty restaurant, then at the man and his daughter. He knew he couldn't afford to give away food, but something about their plight touched him. "Come in," he said softly, stepping aside to let them in. The man and his daughter hesitated, as if they couldn't believe their luck, then stepped inside. The owner led them to a table and quickly prepared a simple meal, a bowl of warm soup and some bread. As they ate, he watched them silently, noticing how the girl's eyes lit up with every bite. "Thank you," the man said, his voice filled with gratitude. "You've shown us kindness when no one else would. And now, I will show you something you'll never forget." The owner frowned, confused. Before he could respond, the man reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, glowing object. It was unlike anything the owner had ever seen, a sleek, metallic device that emitted a soft, pulsating light. "What is that?" the owner asked, his curiosity piqued. The man smiled faintly. "This is a gift, and a test. Use it wisely." Before the owner could ask more questions, the man placed the device on the table and stood up. "We must go now," he said, taking his daughter's hand. "Wait," the owner called out, but the man and his daughter were already heading toward the door. As they stepped back into the rain, the owner stared at the glowing device, his mind racing with questions. What was it? Where had it come from? And why had the man given it to him? Little did he know, this strange encounter would change his life forever. The owner sat alone in the restaurant, staring at the glowing device on the table. Its soft, pulsating light cast eerie shadows on the walls, making the empty space feel even more surreal. He reached out hesitantly, his fingers trembling as they hovered over the object. It felt warm to the touch, almost alive, and a strange sensation coursed through him, a mix of curiosity and unease. "What are you?" he whispered, as if expecting the device to answer. For a moment, he considered throwing it away, dismissing it as some kind of trick or hallucination. But something stopped him. The beggar's words echoed in his mind, "This is a gift, and a test. Use it wisely." Against his better judgment, the owner decided to keep the device. He placed it in his pocket, the warmth radiating through the fabric, and tried to push the strange encounter out of his mind. But that night, as he lay in bed, he couldn't sleep. The device seemed to call to him, its presence impossible to ignore. The next morning, the owner returned to the restaurant, determined to focus on his work. But the place was as empty as ever. He sighed, running a hand through his hair, and sat down at the same corner table where he had met the beggar and his daughter. As he sat there, lost in thought, the device in his pocket began to grow warmer. Startled, he pulled it out and placed it on the table. The light grew brighter, and suddenly, a holographic image appeared above the device, a vision of his restaurant, but not as it was now. In the vision, the place was packed with customers. The walls were freshly painted, the tables filled with laughing people, and the aroma of delicious food filled the air. The owner's heart raced as he watched the scene unfold. It was everything he had ever dreamed of. But just as quickly as it appeared, the vision faded, leaving him staring at the empty restaurant once again. What was that? He muttered, his mind reeling. The device's light dimmed, and the owner sat in stunned silence. He didn't know what to make of it. Was it some kind of trick? A hallucination? Or could it really show him the future? Over the next few days, the owner couldn't stop thinking about the vision. He began to experiment with the device, trying to understand how it worked. He discovered that by focusing on a specific question or desire, the device would show him glimpses of possible outcomes. One day, as he struggled to come up with a new menu to attract customers, he held the device and asked, "What should I serve?" The device responded with a vision of a new dish, a unique combination of flavors that he had never considered before. Intrigued, he decided to give it a try. To his amazement, the dish was a hit. Customers who had long stopped coming to his restaurant began to return, drawn by the new offering. The owner's hope was reignited. For the first time in months, he felt like he had a chance to turn things around. But as the days passed, he began to notice something strange. The device's visions weren't always clear. Sometimes, they were fragmented, showing only pieces of what could happen. Other times, they were unsettling, images of shadows moving in the corners of the restaurant, or dreams of a dark, dystopian future where the world was in chaos. The beggar's warning echoed in his mind, every action has consequences. The owner tried to brush off his doubts, telling himself that the device was a gift, a tool to help him rebuild his life. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was playing with something far beyond his understanding. One evening, as he closed up the restaurant, he noticed the beggar and his daughter standing across the street, watching him. Before he could call out to them, they disappeared into the night, leaving him with more questions than answers. What was the true purpose of the device? And what would happen if he continued to use it? The owner's restaurant began to thrive again, thanks to the device's guidance. Word spread quickly about the new menu, and soon, the once empty tables were filled with customers. The owner couldn't believe his luck. It felt like a miracle, a second chance he had never expected. But with success, came a growing dependence on the device. Every decision, no matter how small, was made with its help. What to cook, how to decorate, even how to interact with customers, the owner relied on the glowing object for everything. It became his constant companion, always in his pocket, always ready to show him the way. One evening, as the restaurant buzzed with activity, the owner noticed something unusual. A group of customers sitting near the window suddenly fell silent, their faces pale as they stared at something in the corner of the room. The owner followed their gaze, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. "Is everything okay?" he asked, approaching their table. The customers exchanged uneasy glances. We thought we saw something," one of them stammered. "A shadow, moving on its own." The owner forced a smile, brushing off their concerns. "Must be a trick of the light," he said, though he couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Later that night, as he locked up the restaurant, the owner felt a chill run down his spine. He turned around, half expecting to see someone, or something, standing behind him. But the room was empty. "Get a grip," he muttered to himself, trying to push the strange thoughts away. The next morning, the owner woke up from a vivid dream. In it, he was standing in the middle of a ruined city, the sky dark and filled with smoke. People wandered the streets, their faces blank and lifeless, as if they had lost all hope. In the distance, he saw his restaurant, now a crumbling shell of its former self. The dream felt so real that it left him shaken. He tried to dismiss it as a product of stress, but the image of the ruined city stayed with him throughout the day. That evening, the beggar and his daughter returned to the restaurant. The owner was surprised to see them, but also relieved. He had so many questions, and he hoped the beggar could provide some answers. "You've been using the device," the beggar said, his tone serious. The owner nodded. "It's been helping me. My restaurant, it's doing better than ever." The beggar's eyes narrowed. "But at what cost? The device is not just a tool. It's a test." And every choice you make with it has consequences. The owner frowned. What do you mean? It's just showing me what could happen. The beggar shook his head. It's showing you possibilities, but it's also changing the balance of things. The more you rely on it, the more you risk losing sight of what's real. The owner didn't want to believe it. The device had saved his business, given him hope. How could it be dangerous? As if reading his thoughts, the beggar leaned closer. There's a reason I gave it to you. I failed the test, and now I'm paying the price. Don't make the same mistake I did. Before the owner could respond, the beggar and his daughter turned and walked away, leaving him alone with his thoughts. That night, the owner couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the device glowing faintly on the nightstand. The beggar's words haunted him. Was he risking too much by using the device? Or was it truly the key to his success? The next day, the owner decided to take a break from the device. He left it at home and tried to run the restaurant on his own. But without its guidance, everything felt uncertain. He second-guessed every decision, and the customers noticed. By the end of the day, the restaurant was quieter than it had been in weeks. The owner sat at his usual corner table, feeling defeated. He reached into his pocket, instinctively searching for the device, but it wasn't there. As he sat there, lost in thought, he noticed something strange. The shadows in the corner of the room seemed to shift and move, as if they had a life of their own. He rubbed his eyes, convinced it was just his imagination, but the feeling of unease remained. The owner knew he had a choice to make. He could continue using the device and risk whatever consequences came with it, or he could trust himself and face the challenges on his own. But as he sat there, staring at the empty tables, he couldn't help but wonder, was the device truly a gift, or was it a curse in disguise? The owner's internal struggle grew as the days passed. The temptation to use the device again was overwhelming. Every time he tried to make a decision without it, he felt lost and uncertain. The restaurant's success had become so tied to the device that he couldn't imagine running the place without it. One evening, after a particularly difficult day, the owner finally gave in. He retrieved the device from his nightstand and held it in his hands, feeling its familiar warmth. As soon as he activated it, a wave of relief washed over him. The device showed him exactly what to do, how to tweak the menu, which suppliers to contact, even how to rearrange the tables to attract more customers. Within days, the restaurant was thriving again. The customers returned, and the owner's confidence soared. But with each use of the device, he noticed something unsettling. The visions it showed him were becoming darker, more fragmented. He began to see glimpses of things he couldn't explain, shadowy figures lurking in the corners of the restaurant, strange symbols etched into the walls, and dreams of a world falling apart. One night, the owner had a particularly vivid dream. He was standing in the middle of a desolate wasteland, the sky a sickly shade of green. The air was thick with ash, and the ground was littered with the remains of buildings and vehicles. In the distance, he saw a massive, swirling vortex, pulling everything toward it. He woke up in a cold sweat, his heart pounding. The device was glowing brightly on the nightstand, as if it had been active while he slept. He reached out to turn it off, but as soon as he touched it, another vision flashed before his eyes, a vision of himself, standing in the ruins of his restaurant, surrounded by the same shadowy figures he had seen in his dreams. The owner pulled his hand away, his breath coming in short gasps. He knew he should stop using the device, but the thought of losing everything again was too much to bear. The next day, the owner decided to push his luck even further. He used the device to predict the outcome of a local lottery. To his amazement, the numbers it showed him were correct. He won a substantial amount of money, enough to pay off his debts and invest in the restaurant. But as his wealth grew, so did his greed. He began to use the device for everything, investing in stocks, making risky business deals, even manipulating people to get what he wanted. The beggar and his daughter, who had been staying in the restaurant, were pushed to the sidelines. The owner barely noticed them anymore, too consumed by his own ambitions. One evening, as the owner counted his latest earnings, the beggar approached him. You're losing yourself, the beggar said, his voice filled with concern. The device is changing you. Can't you see that? The owner glared at him. I'm finally getting what I deserve. Why should I stop now? The beggar sighed. Because the cost is too high. Every time you use the device, you're altering the balance of things. The shadows you see, the dreams you have, they're warnings. If you don't stop, you'll lose more than just your restaurant. The owner shook his head, refusing to listen. You're just jealous. You had your chance, and you failed. I'm not going to make the same mistake. The beggar looked at him with a mixture of sadness and pity. I hope you realize the truth, before it's too late. As the beggar walked away, the owner felt a flicker of doubt. But it was quickly overshadowed by his desire for more. He couldn't stop now. He was too close to achieving everything he had ever wanted. That night, the owner had another dream. This time, he was standing in front of the swirling vortex, the same one he had seen in his previous dream. The shadowy figures surrounded him, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. They reached out to him, their voices a haunting whisper. You've crossed the line, they said. There's no turning back. The owner woke up with a start, his heart racing. The device was glowing brighter than ever, its light filling the room. He grabbed it, intending to turn it off, but as soon as he touched it, a new vision appeared, a vision of the world collapsing, cities crumbling, and people screaming in terror. In the center of it all was the owner, holding the device, his face twisted with fear and regret. The vision faded, leaving the owner in stunned silence. He knew he had to make a choice, but the pull of the device was too strong. He couldn't let go, not now. But deep down, he knew the truth. The device wasn't just a tool, it was a trap. And if he didn't find a way to break free, it would consume him completely. The owner's obsession with the device grew stronger, but so did the unsettling visions and strange occurrences. The shadowy figures he had seen in his dreams began to appear in the corners of the restaurant when he was awake. Customers would sometimes freeze mid-conversation, their eyes glazing over as if they were under some kind of spell. The owner tried to ignore it, telling himself it was just his imagination, but the sense of dread was impossible to shake. One night, after closing the restaurant, the owner found the beggar sitting alone at a table, staring at the wall. His daughter was asleep on a nearby bench, wrapped in a thin blanket. The owner hesitated, then sat down across from the beggar. You were right, the owner admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. The device, it's changing me. I don't know what to do. The beggar looked at him, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and understanding. I've been where you are, he said. I know what it's like to feel the pull of that thing. But you have to understand, it's not just a tool. It's a test of your character. The owner frowned. A test? What do you mean? The beggar leaned forward, his voice low and serious. A long time ago, I was like you. I had nothing, no money, no home, no hope. Then one day, a stranger gave me the device. He told me it could show me the future, but only if I used it wisely. At first, I thought it was a gift. I used it to build a life for myself, to become wealthy and powerful. But the more I used it, the more I lost sight of what really mattered. The owner listened intently, his heart pounding. What happened? The beggar's expression darkened. The device showed me visions of a future I couldn't understand, a world in chaos, a world I had helped create. I realized too late that every choice I made with the device had consequences, not just for me, but for everyone around me. By the time I tried to stop using it, it was too late. The damage was done. The owner felt a chill run down his spine. What kind of damage? The beggar hesitated, as if reliving a painful memory. The device doesn't just show you the future, it changes it. Every time you use it, you're altering the course of events, creating ripples that spread far beyond what you can see. And those ripples, they can lead to disaster. The owner's mind raced as he processed the beggar's words. He thought about the strange occurrences in the restaurant, the shadowy figures, the dreams of a ruined world. Could it all be connected to the device? "Why didn't you tell me this before?" the owner asked, his voice tinged with frustration. The beggar sighed. "I tried to warn you, but you weren't ready to listen. The device has a way of clouding your judgment, making you believe you're in control. But the truth is, it's controlling you." The owner looked down at the device, which was glowing faintly in his pocket. He felt a surge of anger and fear. "What am I supposed to do now? I can't just stop using it. My whole life depends on it." The beggar's expression softened. "You have a choice. You can continue down this path and risk losing everything, or you can let go of the device and face the consequences of your actions. It won't be easy, but it's the only way to break free." The owner clenched his fists, torn between his desire for success and the growing fear of what the device might do. "What if I can't let go?" The beggar placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're stronger than you think. But you have to decide what's more important, your ambition or your humanity." As the beggar stood up to leave, the owner felt a wave of despair. He knew the beggar was right, but the thought of giving up the device was terrifying. It had become a part of him, a crutch he couldn't imagine living without. That night, the owner had another dream. This time, he was standing in the middle of a vast, empty desert. The sky was dark, and the air was filled with the sound of distant screams. In the distance, he saw the beggar and his daughter, walking toward a bright light. The owner tried to call out to them, but no sound came out. He tried to run after them, but his feet were stuck in the sand. As he struggled, the ground beneath him began to crack, and the swirling vortex from his previous dreams appeared, pulling him toward it. He woke up in a cold sweat, the device glowing brightly beside him. For the first time, he felt a glimmer of clarity. He knew what he had to do. The owner sat in the dim light of his restaurant, the device glowing faintly on the table in front of him. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. The beggar's words echoed in his head, "You have to decide what's more important, your ambition or your humanity." For the first time, he allowed himself to truly consider the consequences of his actions. The strange occurrences, the unsettling visions, the growing sense of dread, it all pointed to one undeniable truth. The device was not just a tool, it was a dangerous force, and he had been blind to its true nature. But letting go of it was easier said than done. The device had given him everything: success, wealth, a second chance. Without it, he feared he would lose it all. As he sat there, lost in thought, the beggar's daughter approached him. She was a quiet child, always observing, always listening. She sat down across from him, her big eyes filled with a wisdom beyond her years. "You're scared," she said softly. The owner looked at her, surprised. "What makes you say that?" "Because I was scared too," she replied. "When my father had the device, he changed. He wasn't the same person anymore. But then he let it go, and he became my father again." The owner felt a lump in his throat. "What if I can't do it? What if I'm not strong enough?" The girl reached across the table and placed her small hand on his. "You are strong enough. You just have to believe it." Her words struck a chord deep within him. For the first time in weeks, he felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe he could let go of the device. Maybe he could find a way to rebuild his life without it. That night, the owner made a decision. He would stop using the device, no matter how difficult it was. He would face the challenges ahead on his own, without relying on its power. The next morning, he woke up with a sense of determination. He left the device on the nightstand and went about his day as usual. At first, it was hard. Every decision felt overwhelming, and he second-guessed himself constantly. But as the day went on, he began to feel a sense of clarity he hadn't felt in months. The restaurant was quieter than usual, but the customers who came seemed more genuine, more appreciative. The owner found himself engaging with them in a way he hadn't in a long time. He listened to their stories, shared a few laughs, and even received some heartfelt compliments. For the first time in what felt like forever, he felt like himself again. But as the day turned to night, the shadows in the corners of the restaurant seemed to grow darker, more menacing. The owner tried to ignore them, but the sense of unease was impossible to shake. That evening, as he closed up the restaurant, he noticed the beggar and his daughter standing outside. They were leaving, their few belongings packed into a small bag. "Where are you going?" the owner asked, stepping outside to join them. The beggar smiled faintly. "Our time here is done. We've done what we came to do." The owner felt a pang of sadness. "I don't know if I can do this without you." The beggar placed a hand on his shoulder. "You already are. You've taken the first step, and that's the hardest part. Just remember, true strength comes from within, not from a device." The owner nodded, his eyes filling with tears. "Thank you for everything." The beggar and his daughter turned and walked away, disappearing into the night. The owner stood there for a long time, watching them go. He felt a mix of emotions, sadness, gratitude, and a newfound sense of purpose. As he went back inside, he noticed the device on the nightstand. It was glowing faintly, as if calling to him. He picked it up, his hands trembling, and made a decision. He would destroy it. The owner held the device in his hands, its faint glow casting eerie shadows on the walls of the restaurant. His heart pounded as he stared at it, torn between the urge to destroy it and the fear of what might happen if he did. He knew he couldn't keep it. The device had brought him success, but at a cost he was no longer willing to pay. The shadows, the visions, the growing sense of dread, it all pointed to one undeniable truth. The device was dangerous, and he had to let it go. Taking a deep breath, the owner grabbed a hammer from the kitchen and placed the device on the counter. He raised the hammer, his hands trembling, but just as he was about to bring it down, a voice stopped him. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." The owner froze and turned around. Standing in the doorway was a figure he had never seen before, a tall, imposing man with piercing eyes and an air of authority. His presence was unsettling, and the owner felt a chill run down his spine. "Who are you?" the owner asked, his voice shaky. The man stepped closer, his gaze fixed on the device. "I'm the one who gave that to the beggar. And now, I've come to take it back." The owner's mind raced. This was the mysterious figure the beggar had mentioned, the one who had set this entire chain of events into motion. He tightened his grip on the hammer, unsure whether to trust the man. "Why did you give it to him?" the owner demanded. "Why did you give it to me?" The man smiled faintly, but there was no warmth in his expression. "The device is a test, a way to measure the strength of one's character. Some pass the test, and some fail. The beggar failed, and now you're on the verge of failing as well." The owner's anger flared. "I'm not failing. I'm trying to do the right thing." The man's smile faded. "Destroying the device isn't the right thing. It's a shortcut, a way to avoid facing the consequences of your actions. If you destroy it, the balance will be disrupted, and the consequences will be catastrophic." The owner hesitated, his resolve wavering. "What do you mean?" The man stepped closer, his voice low and intense. "The device is connected to the fabric of reality. Every time you used it, you created ripples that spread far beyond what you could see. If you destroy it now, those ripples will become waves, and the world as you know it will be torn apart." The owner's heart sank. He had thought destroying the device would solve his problems, but now he realized it might only make things worse. "What am I supposed to do, then?" he asked, his voice filled with desperation. The man's expression softened slightly. "You have to return it to me. Only then can the balance be restored." The owner looked down at the device, its glow pulsating like a heartbeat. He knew the man was right. Destroying the device wasn't the answer. But giving it up felt like giving up everything he had worked for. As if sensing his hesitation, the man spoke again. "You've already taken the first step by choosing to let go. That's more than most people can do. But now you have to finish what you started." The owner took a deep breath and nodded. He handed the device to the man, feeling a strange mix of relief and sadness as it left his hands. The man took the device and examined it briefly before slipping it into his pocket. "You've made the right choice," he said. "But the journey isn't over yet. The consequences of your actions will still need to be faced." The owner frowned. "What do you mean?" The man's gaze was steady. "The ripples you created won't disappear overnight. You'll need to work to undo the damage, to rebuild what you've broken. It won't be easy, but it's the only way to truly move forward." Before the owner could respond, the man turned and walked away, disappearing into the night as quickly as he had appeared. The owner stood there for a long time, staring at the empty doorway. He felt a sense of emptiness, but also a glimmer of hope. He had let go of the device, and in doing so, he had taken the first step toward reclaiming his life. But as he looked around the restaurant, he noticed something strange. The shadows in the corners seemed to be fading, the air felt lighter, and the sense of dread that had been hanging over him for weeks was gone. For the first time in a long time, he felt at peace. The days that followed were a mix of relief and struggle for the owner. Without the device, he felt like he was starting over, but there was a newfound clarity in his decisions. The restaurant, though no longer as bustling as it had been during the height of the device's influence, began to regain its warmth and authenticity. Customers returned not for the gimmicks or the illusions of perfection, but for the genuine care and effort the owner put into his work. Yet, the shadows of his past actions lingered. The strange occurrences in the restaurant had stopped, but the owner couldn't shake the feeling that he still owed a debt, not just to himself, but to the world around him. The mysterious man's words echoed in his mind, "The ripples you created won't disappear overnight." One evening, as the owner was closing up, he noticed a familiar face outside the restaurant. It was the beggar's daughter, standing alone in the dim light of the street lamp. She looked smaller, more fragile than he remembered, and her eyes were filled with worry. "Where's your father?" the owner asked, stepping outside to join her. The girl hesitated, then whispered, "He's sick. Really sick." He said, "It's because of the device." The owner's heart sank. He had always assumed the beggar and his daughter had moved on, but now he realized they were still suffering because of him. "Take me to him," the owner said without hesitation. The girl led him through the narrow streets, to a small, run-down shelter on the outskirts of the city. Inside, the beggar lay on a thin mattress, his face pale and his breathing shallow. The owner knelt beside him, guilt washing over him like a tidal wave. "I'm so sorry," the owner said, his voice trembling. "This is all my fault." The beggar opened his eyes and managed a weak smile. "You've done what you could. You returned the device. That's more than I was able to do." The owner shook his head. "But you're still suffering because of me. I need to make this right." The beggar reached out and placed a hand on the owner's arm. "You already are. By letting go of the device, you've started to heal the damage. But there's one more thing you need to do." "What is it?" the owner asked, his voice filled with desperation. The beggar's gaze was steady, despite his weakened state. "You need to help those who were affected by the ripples. The device didn't just change your life, it changed the lives of everyone around you. You have to find a way to make amends." The owner nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I will. I promise." Over the next few weeks, the owner dedicated himself to making things right. He used the money he had earned during his time with the device to help those in need, repairing homes, providing food for the hungry, and even funding a small clinic for the sick. He visited the beggar every day, bringing him medicine and ensuring he had everything he needed to recover. The restaurant became a hub for the community, a place where people could come together and support one another. The owner no longer cared about profits or success, his only goal was to make a positive impact, no matter how small. One evening, as the owner was preparing to close the restaurant, the mysterious man appeared again. This time, his expression was softer, almost approving. "You've done well," the man said. "The ripples are fading, and the balance is being restored." The owner looked at him, a mix of gratitude and curiosity in his eyes. Who are you, really? And why did you give the device to us in the first place? The man smiled faintly. Let's just say I'm a guardian of sorts. My role is to test humanity, to see if they can rise above their desires and do what's right. Most fail, but you surprised me. The owner felt a swell of pride, but it was tempered by humility. I couldn't have done it without the beggar and his daughter. They showed me what really matters. The man nodded. Sometimes, it takes the kindness of others to remind us of our own humanity. Remember that, and you'll never lose your way again. With that, the man turned and walked away, disappearing into the night. The owner watched him go, feeling a sense of closure he hadn't felt in a long time. As he locked up the restaurant and headed home, he noticed the beggar and his daughter standing under a street lamp, their faces lit with smiles. The beggar looked healthier, his strength returning day by day. Thank you, the beggar said, his voice filled with gratitude. You've given us more than just help. You've given us hope. The owner smiled, feeling a warmth in his heart that no device could ever provide. No, he said. You gave me hope. And for that, I'll always be grateful. The owner's life had changed in ways he could never have imagined. The restaurant, once a symbol of his desperation and greed, had become a beacon of hope and community. People no longer came just for the food, they came for the sense of belonging, for the kindness and warmth that now filled the place. The beggar and his daughter became a permanent part of the owner's life. The beggar, now fully recovered, helped run the restaurant, bringing with him a wisdom and humility that resonated with everyone who walked through the doors. His daughter, bright and curious, brought a sense of joy and innocence that reminded the owner of what truly mattered. One evening, as the sun set and the restaurant buzzed with laughter and conversation, the owner stood at the counter, watching the scene unfold. He felt a deep sense of contentment, something he hadn't felt in years. A customer approached him, an elderly man with a kind smile. This place, it's special, the man said. You've created something truly remarkable here. The owner smiled, his heart swelling with gratitude. Thank you. But it's not just me. It's everyone who comes here, everyone who believes in the power of kindness and community. The man nodded, his eyes twinkling. You've learned a valuable lesson, haven't you? The owner's smile softened. Yes. I've learned that true wealth isn't measured in money or success. It's measured in the lives we touch and the love we share. As the night went on, the owner found himself reflecting on his journey. He thought about the device, the visions, the shadows, and the sacrifices he had made. He thought about the beggar and his daughter, the mysterious man, and the countless lives that had been affected by his choices. He realized that the device had been both a curse and a blessing. It had shown him the darkest parts of himself, but it had also led him to the light. It had taught him that every action has consequences, and that true strength comes from within. Before closing up for the night, the owner stepped outside and looked up at the stars. The sky was clear, the air crisp and calm. He felt a sense of peace, knowing that he had finally found his place in the world. As he turned to go back inside, he noticed something on the ground near the entrance. It was a small, glowing object, a fragment of the device. He picked it up, feeling its familiar warmth, but this time, there was no pull, no temptation. He smiled and placed the fragment in his pocket, not as a tool, but as a reminder. A reminder of the lessons he had learned, the mistakes he had made, and the second chance he had been given. The next morning, the owner woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. He knew that the road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but he also knew that he had the strength to face whatever challenges came his way. As he opened the restaurant and welcomed the first customers of the day, he felt a sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought him here. He had lost everything, only to find something far greater, a life filled with meaning, love, and hope. And as he looked around at the smiling faces, the laughter, and the sense of community, he knew that he had finally found his true purpose.